Okay, so we are in session 1, and you'll notice that there is a pretty tree in the background. That's actually called a myrtle tree. And Esther's name in Hebrew is Hadassah, which means myrtle, which is where we get myrtle tree from. And then it is believed that Esther, which is her Persian name, would be from either Ishtar, which was their goddess of love, or Star, just because she was the star of the story, kind of a deal. So what I'm going to do today is a little bit different. I normally do the who, what, where, when, and why. We're going to go over that, but I think that John MacArthur really did a fantastic job doing that. So I have an 8-minute clip real quick from him that I figured I'd share with you guys. Let's see if it plays for everybody. It did. Okay.
Well, I am greatly challenged on some occasions, in all honesty, as you well know, to get through one verse. This morning, I made it through a whole chapter, and tonight we'll take a whole book. That's the book of Esther. You want to open your Bible, if you will, to the book of Esther. And this is in our continuing series on 12 unlikely heroes from the Bible, the Old and the New Testament. Through the years, we have looked at the book of Esther here at Grace Community Church and found it to be a marvelous, marvelous book. It is one of 2 books in the Bible in which the name of God is not mentioned. The ruler who is featured in the book is mentioned 175 times. God is never mentioned. And yet, to any reader of the book who reads with understanding, God is the main character in the book. And God is putting himself on display in amazing ways, even though he is unnamed. Let me take you back in history. This is going to be a little bit like a lecture tonight, so hang in there. The year was 480 BC. I love history, you know that. The year was 480 BC, and a massive Persian army marched with determination to face the rebel forces of Athens and its Greek allies. Persia against the Greek powers. Ancient sources number the Persians at 1 million soldiers. Or modern sources hedge on that a little bit and think it may have been hundreds of thousands. In any case, Persia is putting on a massive military display. At the time, the Persian Empire stretched from modern-day Libya in Africa all the way to Pakistan in Asia. It was the largest empire in history, the second great empire after the Babylonian Empire. At the best we can tell, there were about 50 million people in the Persian Empire of that day. They had conquered the Babylonian Chaldean Empire in 539 BC, and the Persians had settled into domination in the Middle Eastern world, and it lasted for 200 years before they were replaced by the Greeks, who later were replaced by the Romans. But initially, the regions of Greece had been conquered by the Persians under Darius, and that would be back in 550 and following. Darius' armies had been defeated by the Athenians at the famous Battle of Marathon in 490. Enraged, Darius was determined to subdue his Greek enemies. He amasses a great army. He's going to go back and he's going to pay the Greeks for winning the battle at Marathon, that famous battle where a man ran 26 miles. And that is where we get the distance of modern-day marathons. So the king, Darius, had great intentions to satisfy his thirst for vengeance. However, he died before he could exact his vengeance. And the quest for vengeance fell to his son, the son of Darius. This is a man named Xerxes. Xerxes, famous name to people who know history, who lives from 519 to 465 BC, rises to power in 486. And when he takes the throne, his first order of business is to deal with Egypt and Babylon because they're giving him trouble and he has to subdue them. He's unable then to set his sights on Greece to wreak the vengeance of his father on them, but by the year 481, he's ready to attack. So Xerxes gets together to get vengeance on Greece for what they did during his father's reign. He gets together an army of 250,000 men. They're stacked in modern-day Turkey, and they're waiting for orders to cross into Greece. Now, in order to cross into Greece, they're going to have a means to get across. They're making all the plans for that, and they do it. Things, however, didn't go as Xerxes expected. His armies reach Athens, they sack the city, but the Greeks ultimately defeat the Persians and drive them back out of Greece. There's some very famous battles, the Battle of Thermopylae, the 300 Spartans, you may know that, the Battle of Salamis, where the Persian navy is completely obliterated by the Greeks. I think they lost as many as 300 of their warships. All of that simply to say there is battle history going on between the Persian Empire, the reigning world empire, and the Greeks, who are about to take possession of the world as the next great empire. Xerxes fights repeatedly against the Greeks, and he has some measure of success, but more defeat than success, until finally a man comes along by the name of Alexander the Great, who is Greek. And the Persian Empire is defeated for good. And Alexander the Great conquers the Middle Eastern world and establishes what we know as the Great Greek Empire. Now, what does all this have to do with the book of Esther? And there are a lot more details about that, by the way, in the book, 12 Unlikely Heroes. But what does that have to do with the book of Esther? Well, it has this to do with the book of Esther. The emperor, whom the Greeks called Xerxes, that I've been talking about, has a different name in Persian. His name is Kasharasha. In Hebrew, Akashrevash. In your English Bible, Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus, and that's the name you're going to find in the book of Esther. The king in the book of Esther is none other than Xerxes, the son of Darius, who fought the Greeks and ultimately lost the Persian Empire to the power of the Greeks. This is the man who tried to conquer Greece with 250,000 soldiers. This is the man, Ahasuerus, the king in the book of Esther, who is the one who becomes the ruler of that empire after the death of his father. And he is the man who has his heart conquered by this Jewish orphan named Esther. And when the opportunity came, she would use her influence to save the Jewish race from genocide. That's the story of Esther. How one woman, through the providence of God, saved the Jews from genocide. The book has her name, not because she wrote it. She didn't write it. We don't know who wrote it. Maybe Mordecai wrote it, her cousin. Maybe Ezra wrote it. Maybe Nehemiah wrote it, or some other Jew dwelling at the time in Persia, somebody who understood the Persian scene and somebody who also understood the Jewish culture and had a detailed knowledge of both. But whoever the author is, the real author of the story is God. Behind it.
So I'm going to stop there. So he gives a really good introduction about King Ahasuerus, which is King Xerxes. And we'll read quite a bit about him, and we'll see exactly where this time frame fits in between those wars. So when we talk about the book, when we do our who, what, where, when, and whys, the book we're talking about is Esther. Again, in the book, she's titled, her name is Hadassah in the Hebrew, and then her Persian name is Esther. Hadassah meaning myrtle, like the myrtle tree like we had in the very beginning. And then Esther could either mean Ishtar, which is that Babylonian goddess of love, or a star, so to speak. The where and the when, we know that it occurred in the Persian Empire around 539. And Ahasuerus ruled, just like Johnny Mac was saying here, from 486 to 465. Esther covers 483 to 473 BC during that portion of his reign. If we go to the why, And I have a two-part on the why. The events of Esther occurred during the wider time span between the first return of the Jews after the 70-year captivity in Babylon. And Esther and Exodus both chronicle how vigorously foreign powers tried to eliminate the Jewish race and how God sovereignly provided for his people in accordance with his covenant. So, if we're looking at this timeline in history, we remember that Israel, the Jews, were conquered by Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar brought the Jews and all the wise Jews and all the smart people into his kingdom of Babylon. And that's where we get Daniel. Daniel was one of those people who had visions, and he told them that Nebuchadnezzar's grandson would lose the kingdom to Cyrus. And if you guys recall, we talked about Cyrus. After Cyrus was Darius, and Darius' son is, or King Darius, is this guy, King Xerxes, Ahasuerus. So we still have Jews that had moved back into the land at this time, but there were Jews that were stayed in Babylon because they were comfortable, and Babylon had now become Persia. And we're going to read, as soon as we start reading this, we're going to see how many of those areas Persia really encompassed. If you look at this map on the bottom right corner, that is the Persian Empire. So this isn't just some small little clan. This is a massive, massive overhaul. We're going to talk about the why. The why is, it's all about providence, which means is that, does anyone know what providence means? Have they ever heard the word before? Okay. So John Piper gives a really good definition. He goes, providing for, sustaining, and governing the universe by God. We see the next one. God's providence is God's caring provision for his people as he guides them in the journey of faith through life. And it's really just God's purpose being fulfilled. We see Satan all throughout history trying to interrupt God's plan and God's purpose. And this is one of those moments, just like the moment when we would talk about Hitler trying to eradicate the Jews. So, Esther 1, chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. This is going to give us an idea of where they're located, the province. So now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan in the citadel. So this is a much larger version of that map that we talked about earlier. This is their all-encompassing area. So verses 3 through 9, that in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of the glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. So he throws a massive party, huge, and it's lasting 180 days. That's a long party.
You got that
right. This is, you need to have someone take the keys to your camel, right? That's a long time to be partying. So so we see here, and when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars. And the couches were of gold and silver on mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti, or Vashti, also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to the king Ahasuerus. So, King Xerxes' wife is Queen Vashti. So, on the 7th day, which would be the last day of that second feast, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abigatha, Zahar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus to bring Queen Vashti before the king. Please be quiet. So, what does it mean that you're a eunuch? Does anyone remember? What does it mean, Levi? Does anyone else know what it means? A eunuch was someone and they were castrated for the purposes of the king. Okay? What castrated means is they chopped his balls off. I know that sounds pretty vulgar, but that's exactly what's happening. And they would actually demasculate these men so that they wouldn't be tempted to defile the women inside the court for the king. And there were people as Jesus even talks about, people who were made eunuchs from birth, people who chose this lifestyle, and then people who had it chosen for them. So that's what a eunuch is. Therefore, the king was, okay, back to it. In order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. Therefore, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore, the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. The king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, the closest to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and Mecum, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to the law, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus brought to her by the eunuchs? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also the princes and all the people who are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes. When they report, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before the king Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house and speak in the language of his own people. So you guys got what happened here, right? There's some scholars who say that the verbiage reads as though she was told to come before the leaders and the people naked. There's nothing here that indicates that to me in the text. It may have been that she just didn't want to go, while the bunch of drunk dudes are hanging out there to behold her beauty, so to speak. But the king's council essentially says, hey, this is a problem. If your queen doesn't listen to you, none of our wives will listen to us. You need to make an example of her. And so they do. Her crown is taken from her. So after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended to him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel, into the women's quarters, under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women. And let beauty preparations be given them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. So, got a big beauty pageant taking place. We're going to say it's Miss Persia, right? They're all getting prepared for this big beauty event. So, in Shushan the citadel, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it was when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel under the custody of Hegai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave beauty preparations to her besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. Esther had not revealed her people or family, for Mordecai had charged her to not reveal it. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Each young woman's turn came to go into King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months preparation, according to the regulations for the women. For thus were the days of their preparation apportioned: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. Thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. So, imagine this. All the women that are chosen, they're going on a 12-month spa day. That's a long time to be on a spa day. And basically, they're trying to be as the most attractive they could possibly be for the king. So, in the evening, speaking about Esther, she went. And in the morning she returned to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch who kept the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and called for her by name. Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter to go into the king, she requested nothing but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the custodian of the women, advised. And Esther obtained favor in the sight of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight, more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. So, 12-month-long process. It's Esther's turn to be examined. All the other women were able to bring whatever they want into the king's palace with them, and Esther chose not to bring anything but wanted the advice of the person who was in charge. Though she conducted herself well, the king loved her, picked her out of everybody that was there, and like what John MacArthur was saying before, that in a population of 50 million, there hypothetically speaking, you'd see 25 million, and of the choicest of the choice, all those women were gathered in the citadel. And here's this young woman who has no parents, raised by her uncle. She's the one who gets selected out of everybody. It's pretty cool. So when the virgins were gathered together a second time, Mordecai sat within the king's gate. Now Esther had not revealed her family and her people, just as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther obeyed the command of Mordecai as when she was brought up by him. In those days, while Mordecai sat within the king's gate, 2 of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers, became furious and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. So the matter became known to Mordecai, who told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. And when an inquiry was made into the matter, it was confirmed, and both were hanged on a gallows. and it was written in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So, if you guys aren't picking this up, Mordecai would frequently check on Esther so he would stand at the king's gate. On this particular day, he was standing outside the king's gate, and he heard these two people who were employed by the king conspiring to kill him. Mordecai sent the message to Esther. Esther told the king, hey, this guy out in the gate, Mordecai, has heard of this conspiracy. There was an inquiry that was filed into it, and it was confirmed, and so they hanged those two guys. And so what's cool is the Persians, they wrote everything down. So they kept a book of the Chronicles, right? So this was written down in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. So after these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman. For so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, why do you transgress the king's command? Now it happened when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman, to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. So, can you guys name other Jews that didn't want to bow before something? Levi, go. Lily, go.
Oh,
There's three of them.
Shadrach,
Yep. Who's the other one?
Abednego.
Yep. And there's one more. And Meshach. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what did they not want to bow down to? A statue, a golden statue that he made. He wanted everyone to worship it, right?
Well, you know that too. Yeah.
So we can see that within the culture of the Jewish culture, they were not to bow to any other god. And it's almost as if Mordecai took it to the next level. He wasn't going to bow to this man, Haman the Agagite. So Haman also learns at this time that Mordecai's a Jew. And so you may ask yourself, well, what's the significance of that? Why does that matter? And this is a Chuck Missler thing that I'm going to share with you guys, and many others as well, by the way, bring a note to this. So Mordecai is of Jewish descent. We've already read that he's the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away to Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured by Jeconiah. So we've read that already. Haman, in multiple verses, we see that he is, the recurring theme is that he is an Agagite or an Agagite, right? So here's a key note. And I know there's a lot here. We're not going to read it all. But do you guys remember when all of Israel, they wanted a king? They wanted a king. So they went to Samuel asking for a king. And God chose the first king for them. And it was King Saul. It was the first. Okay. So this is what we know about the first king. There was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zahor, the son of Becherath, the son of Apithath, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. And we'll read a little bit about him, right? And he had a choice and handsome son whose name was Saul. There was not a more handsome person than among the children of Israel. From his shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the other people. Now, the donkeys of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. And Kish said to his son Saul, please take one of the servants with you, arise and go and look for my donkeys. So, and what you learn in this story is he wants to find a prophet or a seer. So he's seeking out Samuel. But Samuel is told of God that the man who's seeking him is going to be the king. So we scroll down here toward the bottom. It says, this one shall reign over my people. Then Saul drew near Samuel in the gate and said, eat with me today, and tomorrow I will let you go, and will tell you all that is in your heart. But as for your donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, do not be anxious about them, for they have been found. And on whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on you and on your father's house? And this is Saul responding to him. Number one, he didn't know that his donkeys have been found. This guy's freaking him out. How could he possibly know that? And he's speaking of him in a really high manner. And Saul responds again, am I not a Benjamite of the smallest of the tribes of Israel, and my family of the least of the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then do you speak to me like this? And here we see Samuel. Now Samuel took Saul, his servant, and brought them into the hall and had them sit in the place of honor among those who were invited. There were about 30 persons, and we see that Saul was in fact appointed king. So we see a little bit of a tie here, right? We see Mordecai of Jewish descent, just like Saul. We see that he is the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, right? A Benjamite. So who was Kish's son? Firstborn, or not firstborn, but first son that we read about here is Saul, King Saul, who's also a Benjamite. So we see that there is a direct linear tree between Mordecai and King Saul. So you're going to be asking me, Elliot, what does that have to do with the story? As we read on in 1 Samuel, when Saul is recorded as king, Saul was given a task to do. There's a ton of things that he's told to do, and he does well in the beginning. But he gets very prideful towards the tail end of things, right? And so we see something specific that comes from God directed at Saul. And it is then translated from Samuel to Saul. So Samuel says this. Samuel also said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore heed the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, how he ambushed him on the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and attack Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, infant and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. And you'll see that I've paraphrased a lot of this, lots of dots. And Saul attacked the Amalekites from Havilah all the way to the Shur, which is the east of Egypt. He also took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep, the oxen, the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were unwilling to utterly destroy him. Now the word of the Lord came to Samuel, saying, I greatly regret that I have set Saul as king, for he has turned back from following me and has not performed my commandments. So Samuel is being warned by God that Saul did not follow the command. So Samuel goes to Saul and says to him, blessed are you of the Lord. Or no, I'm so sorry. Samuel goes back to see Saul, and Saul says to Samuel, blessed are you of the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. But Samuel said, what then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? So Saul responds, because he didn't obey the command. It was to kill everything. And Saul said, they have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have utterly destroyed. Then Samuel said to Saul, be quiet, and I will tell you what the Lord said to me last night. And he said to him, speak on. So Samuel said, when you were little in your own eyes, were you not head of the tribes of Israel? And did not the Lord anoint you king over Israel? Now the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. When they did not obey, why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of the Lord? And Saul said to Samuel, but I have obeyed the voice of the Lord and gone on the mission on which the Lord had sent me and brought back Agag, king of Amalek. I have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. Has the Lord as great delight? Okay, he's saying that he did the task, and I paraphrase that. And Samuel's response is, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifice as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he also has rejected you from being king. Then Samuel said, and there's a lot going on there. Then Samuel says, bring Agag, king of the Amalekites, to me. So Agag came to him cautiously, and Agag said, surely bitterness of death is past. But Samuel said, as your sword has made women childless, so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag into pieces before the Lord in Gilgal. So it's pretty clear in this instance that Saul did not follow the instructions of what he was told from Samuel, from God, and that he had left people alive. He says he wiped him out, but we could see that Agag was still left alive here, and we see that Samuel wipes him out. So if we were to look at this story one more time, we see Mordecai is a Jew, a direct descendant of Saul, a Jew, you know what I mean? When we think of other Jews, we would think of Samuel in that instance. And then we see Haman, who's an Agagite, which would be a descendant of Agag. It's very possible that they were aware of each other's history, on top of the fact that Mordecai was just adhering to the law in not bowing to another man. I don't believe it to be conjecture, because we have these scriptures from the Old Testament that kind of help validate this whole scenario, and this kind of sheds some light on the rest of the story. So Haman's very unhappy that Mordecai's not bowing to him. So we're going to get back into Esther chapter 3. So this is what happens. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, lots, before Haman to determine the day and the month until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, so understanding a little bit about what's going right here, remember when they were casting lots over Jesus's clothing? Casting lots was a way, it was like a form of, I don't want to say of witchcraft, but it was a way that these things that they threw down gave them guidance. I don't want to say like a Ouija board, because it's used differently in other applications as well. But that's what they were using as a message, as a superstitious way to find out when's the day to present this item to the king. Because Haman he wants to wipe out the Jews. And so they cast these lots and they determine this date. It's got to be in the 12th month. So then Haman goes to the king, King Ahasuerus, and says, there's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it to the king's treasuries. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, the money and the people are given to you to do with them as seems good to you. Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all the people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of the king Ahasuerus it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. So, number one, he's trying to eradicate their entire genealogy, their nationality, everything about the Jews. He's killing them all. It's not even about Mordecai anymore. And the way that he sweetens the pot is that we know this is sometime after that military scrimmage where Xerxes lost his battles. So they're down on finances, they're down on funds, they're down on people. What Haman's plan is to kill all these Jews and take everything they have, take all their money and put it in the treasury. 10,000 talents was a ton of money. I can't remember. I think it was somewhere in like I don't even want to, I remember someone doing the scale. It's between 5 and 50 million. I can't remember. It was a big number. So the king hears all these things and it sounds great. And so he goes ahead and gives the signet ring, because remember, the law of the Medes and the Persians never changes. We also learned that from who, Levi? He was thrown into a lion's den. What was his name? Daniel. King Darius threw Daniel into the lion's den because he prayed. But he prayed, and he was told not to pray to any other god. And the king, hang on, Lily, the king did not want to kill Daniel, and he wanted to take the law away, but he couldn't, because the law of the Medes and the Persians never changed. Yeah, okay. So we have something very similar right now with Haman, where they make the law happen, okay? And so this law can't change. So, letters to kill. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. So they're having some beers over this, because this is going to be great. We're going to put a ton of money in the treasury. Haman's stoked because he gets to kill this Jew, Mordecai. And what better way to rub it in his face that you're not even just going to kill him, you're going to wipe out the entire population, right? But we see here the city's confused. So, chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, he tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city. He cried out with a loud and bitter cry. He went as far as the front of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province where the king's command and decree arrived, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her, and the queen was deeply distressed. She sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take his sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. So Esther hears about what's going on, but she doesn't know that the Jews are going to get wiped out. All she knows is that Mordecai is in mourning, and she wants to do something nice. She goes to send him new clothes. Hey, man, you're in sackcloth. That's very uncomfortable. You got ashes all over you. Check out these new garments. And he responds, then she sent garments to clothe Mordecai and take the sackcloth away from him, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend her, and she gave him a command concerning Mordecai, to learn what and why this was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square that was in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries to destroy the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the written decree for their destruction, which was given at Shushan, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her, and that he might command her to go into the king to make supplication to him and plead before him for her people. So Hathach returned and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Esther chapter 4. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and gave him a command for Mordecai. All the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who goes into the inner court of the king, who has not been called, he has but one law: put all to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, that he may live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the king these 30 days. So they told Mordecai Esther's words, and Mordecai told them to answer Esther. Do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet you, who knows whether you have come to this kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast likewise, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went on his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So the rules at the time was no one was allowed to go into the inner court. It was a defense mechanism. Nobody could get to the king, could attack him. If you went and you weren't called and the king didn't raise his scepter, you were killed immediately. That's just how it worked. When we talk about this king, Ahasuerus, he had built this very, very long bridge that had 300 civil engineers that had worked on this bridge day and night to get his troops over into Greece. And a bad storm came through, and the bridge fell down, and the king took all 300 men and had them beheaded. He then sent the army out into the ocean and threw chains into the water as if to bind it, and ordered the water to be whipped, and he was punching the water. He was just very angry and unstable. It sounds foolish to us now, but he was that type of guy. So if you were to do what she's doing, it was very likely that she would be killed just for going in there. But what Mordecai explains to her is that her whole life story has led up to this moment, and that it's possible that the reason that she's there is for this exact purpose. And that's why we see here, yet who knows whether you have come to this kingdom for such a time as this. This is her purpose in life. What I love also about Mordecai is what Mordecai says is, if you don't go and you're killed and I'm killed, God will deliver his people in some way. No matter what. That's faith. Doesn't matter if I die, the people will not be eradicated because God promised them through Abraham and through David. So he's aware of that, but he's utilizing this opportunity that this may be a way to preserve many of these Jews, including herself. So she gives the order and asks them all to fast, which I thought was interesting because it's for 3 days and 3 nights. 3 days and 3 nights, a big deal, because give me a 3 day and 3 night scenario out of the Bible, Michelle. How long was Jesus in the grave?
3 days.
How long was Jonah in the whale? 3 days and 3 nights, 3 days and 3 nights. It's things like that don't just kind of happen. You know what I mean? It's interesting to see it there. So now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house facing the entrance of the house. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you up to half the kingdom." So Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom. It shall be done." Then Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of my king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to a banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king said." So, what's very interesting here, the king is giving her an option to have up to half of the kingdom. And her response, very humbly, is just for them to come to dinner, right? So they had a banquet of wine, and then her petition during this time is that they have one more day. Something's wrong. The timing's not right. She asks for another day to have this feast be tomorrow, the next day. So Haman went out that day joyful with a glad heart. So he's leaving the palace. And as he's leaving the palace gate, guess who Haman sees? Mordecai. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she prepared. And tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then his wife, Zeresh, and all his friends said to him, let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, and let the morning suggest to the, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it, then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made. So it's Haman's on cloud 9. He's been promoted. The king thinks that this plan that he has is fantastic. The queen comes in and invites him to dinner. Just him, the king, and the queen. He really feels like he's in second command. He couldn't be any higher. He calls all his friends over to boast about everything that he has, about how many kids he has, and how he's been this and he's been that. And then he lets them know it doesn't matter. No matter how great everything is, it's all worthless because of this loser Mordecai. And his wife says, well, you know, you're so great and this and that. Go ahead and make a 75-foot tall gallows and then ask the king to have him hanged in the morning. So he does it. And I actually looked at how they make these gallows back in the day. They take a tree and they nail a cross member over on the backside and they just stand it up. So it can be made really quickly, actually. So it's 8 o'clock. Should we stop? It's stopped. There's 10 chapters in the book. I'm aware. You guys want to stop there?
Six to 10.
Okay.
No
Yeah.
choice.
It's going to be one of those things where you'll be excited. For me, I've read it like 3 or 4 times. It's just an exciting book. You can either choose to read it on your own, the rest of it. We are going to cover the rest of it next week. But if you don't want to put the book down, you want to figure out what happens. It's kind of exciting.